booktuber, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. This video will be about a single book because I spent so much time with it, I think it deserves its own video. It's the book that I read for March of the Mammoth, which is an event where we are invited to start reading a book that is at least 800 pages long. And I chose a book that is over 1,000 pages long. It is Beethoven, Anguish and Triumph by John Swafford. It is a biography of the composer Ludwig van Beethoven. As you can see, it's huge. It has over 1,000 pages if you include the index and the notes, and I did not read all of that. The text itself stops at page 946, but there's also an introduction that is not included in that. So it's a big book, and I'm very happy I read it. So I'm going to make a review of this book, and perhaps I will rant. I have to confess, this is the second time I'm filming this video because the previous attempt ended in a rant against modern classical music, which has nothing to do, well, it has a little bit something to do with this, but not so much that it deserved a 15-minute rant. So I'm just starting over. So Beethoven. So if you are looking for a biography of Beethoven and you are wondering, is this the one that I should read? I'm going to say it depends very much what you are looking for in your biography of Beethoven. This one heavily focuses on music. There are tons of music analysis. I would say about half the book is music analysis. If you want something that is more a psychological portrait of Beethoven, or if you want something that delves into the mysteries in the life of Beethoven, like, I don't know, a medical investigation where we would look to why made Beethoven deaf and what made him ill pretty much every day of his life, or something that goes more into his personal life, trying to look who is Elise of Fürelise and who are the women Beethoven loved, and things like that. It may not be the best book. Of course, these things are mentioned, otherwise I would not mention them, I wouldn't know about them. But they are not necessarily the focus of the book. The private life and the man Beethoven, it's there perhaps to explain the music or to provide a context in which the music was composed. So music analysis. If you don't know what is music analysis or music, if you've never been to a classical music concert and you've never read program notes, here's an excerpt. It's about Opus 53, the Valjein Sonata, and I thought it was very representative of the type of analysis, the type of music talk that we get in this book. The Valjein Sonata leaps into life in medias res with a sense of restless energy that will hardly flag throughout. Above the pounding rhythms are only scraps of motifs. At first, the music is like an accompaniment in search of a theme. Mainly, the effect is of a surging and singularly pianistic dynamism. The C major opening immediately strays to G major, then drops to B flat major, straying to F, searching for a resolution. The main relief from the irresistible drive is the sudden piece of the chorale-like second theme in a radiant E major, which sprouts a babbling variation in triplets. So, and this is just the beginning of the Valjein Sonata, and it goes on for several paragraphs, if not several pages, and explains pretty much the entire piece. Some pieces get an entire chapter for them. That's Symphony number 3 and Symphony number 9. They each get a 30-page analysis. So if this is the sort of talk that does not really interest you, then I would suggest you skip this book because, as I said, it's pretty much half the book that is this sort of music talk. One thing that I did to make this even more interesting, because I think it's interesting, the technicality about the keys, the G major straying into F, straying into I don't remember what, this I'm not versed enough in music to know exactly what it means. I know that the key of G major is the one with one sharp, and that C major is with no sharp, no flats, and that sort of thing, but I don't really know what it means to jump from one to the other. It doesn't mean much to me. So what I did to make things more interesting was that I simply listened to the pieces as they were described. So it's sort of a book that comes with its own background music, with its own soundtrack, which is awesome. Well, assuming you like the music of Beethoven, of course. Now, I do like the music of Beethoven, otherwise I wouldn't have bothered with the book. For a long time, I had the Third Symphony in my head. I think I had it for almost a week because the Third Symphony plays a big role in Beethoven, the composer's life. It's a turning point, and a lot of time is spent on it, I think, for a good reason. So I had it in my head, and I listened to it over and over again, and it was quite fun. I kind of like that. So yeah, so that's the sort of music analysis you'll get. If you don't like it, well, it's going to be a long book for you. This is going to be really long. Other than the music analysis, we also have things about Beethoven the man. It begins at the beginning. We also have quite a bit of political situation, because Beethoven was born in 1770, so that means that when he came of age, when he was about 18, 19, 20, the French Revolution happened, and it had a lot of consequences on the little town where Beethoven was brought up, which is the town of Bonn on the Rhine. And also during the end of the 18th century in Germany, there was the Aufklärung movement that was very popular among the intellectual elites and the artists. And the Aufklärung is basically the Enlightenment. It's the same thing as the French Enlightenment movement, but with a few differences. One of the main differences is that it was not very much preoccupied with politics. It was not about political upheaval, and it was really about putting men, and in this particular case, men with testosterone and Y chromosome, and men, not women, at the center of everything. And this had a profound influence on Beethoven. As you may probably think, you probably think about the Ode of Joy in the Ninth Symphony, and this is one of the last pieces he composed, and yet it stems from his childhood and his upbringing in Bonn, a city that was intellectually quite free compared to what happened afterwards, particularly in Vienna, where Beethoven spent the rest of his life. So we have that. We also have Beethoven the man, who was not very nice. Little excerpt again. If he was not mean, he was still proud, suspicious, paranoid, contemptuous of much of humanity. And that is at page 173, when Beethoven was about 23 years old. So you can imagine it did not get better as he aged and got more sick and got more ill. So yeah, Beethoven was not the nicest of men, and we can see that with pretty much all of his relationships with his friends. He fights with his friends at some point or another, pretty much all of them, with his brothers, and then one of his brothers dies and leaves a nephew, and Beethoven decides that he's going to adopt the nephew regardless of what the mother wants, and it becomes ugly. Beethoven was not very good at human relationships, so it's a good thing he was a good composer. Otherwise his life would have been would have been difficult. It was a difficult life. He did not have an easy life. But yeah, so all of this to say that this is a very interesting biography. And one of the things that I thought about as I read this is that Beethoven was one of the first independent artists. You probably know that before Beethoven there was Haydn, the composer, who spent most of his life as a servant of an aristocrat. And then there was Mozart, who started his life as the servant of an aristocrat, the Archbishop of Salzburg, and then became an independent artist and struggled financially and eventually died quite soon after gaining his freedom in a way. So Beethoven was among the first to successfully be an independent artist. And I think that played a big role in the 19th and 20th century vision of what an artist is. Because Beethoven was successful, that doesn't mean he didn't have money problems. He had tons of financial difficulties, but he was nevertheless successful at being an independent artist. So yeah, Beethoven became a precursor in that sense too, not just his music, because his music was of course well ahead of his time, but also his way of living was well ahead of his time. And okay, now back to the music that was ahead of its time. And that is where I started to rant in my previous attempt at making this video. There is a bit here about the Third Symphony. There was a review at the time that was a friendly review, well, favorable review. that said that if the public did not quite appreciate it, it's because the public is not sufficiently educated in art to be able to grasp all of these elevated beauties. And I thought, oh darn, that's not mentioned by Swafford. It's me as a patron of classical music concerts. Before the pandemic, I had season tickets to the National Arts Center Orchestra and had these tickets for the past 10 years. So I'm a long time attendant of a concert. I'm a concert goer. And I thought, okay, that is the first time that they decide to blame the public. And it was not the last. It became, particularly in the 20th century. So I thought, in this particular case, it should have been put back in context. It was put back in context a little bit, but I wish it was put more in context. If the music of Beethoven was not understood at the time, it's because it wasn't played. For human beings to become acquainted with a piece of music, with a song, let's say, we have to hear it a great number of times. I think we have to hear it, it's 30 times before we are truly familiar with a piece of music and we can say, oh, I love that piece of music. Now, of course, Beethoven composed gigantic symphonies for big orchestras, and at the time permanent symphony orchestras did not exist. So it meant if the piece was played once or twice in Vienna, it was unlikely to ever be played again. And it's not so much because people did not like the music, it's because it was too complicated to set up concerts where the music could be played. So with such difficult music that lasts an hour long, symphony that lasts an hour long, that was revolutionary at the time. Of course, the public could not like it. There was no way the public could hear it enough to like it. And because permanent symphony orchestras did not exist at the time, it meant that the musicians were taken here and there. Some of them were not professional musicians. They had a couple of rehearsals and then bang, you have to play the new music that nobody's ever heard before. So, of course, his music could not really be liked. And what makes me a little bit angry is that it somewhat became proof that if you are misunderstood in your own time, it means you're a great artist. And it's just not true. Beethoven was very much admired in his life. He was considered the greatest composer of his time. So he was not misunderstood, even if some of his music did not get played very much or was not considered the greatest at the time, was not the most loved music at the time. It doesn't mean that he was a misunderstood composer or a misunderstood artist. So that got me a little bit, so that should be put in context more when we talk about Beethoven as a misunderstood artist. He was famous, and the reason why he didn't make millions of dollars is because there was no such thing as copyright at the time, so he had to sell either concert tickets or get paid by a publisher who could not be guaranteed exclusivity anyway, because some other publishers could just copy that and then sell it without paying Beethoven. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I will not rant about modern classical music where we blame the public as a rule and don't care for what the public likes and all of that. That is for the deleted video. So I think that's all I have to say about Beethoven, about this book, about this biography of Beethoven. I think it's completely worth it if you love the music of Beethoven, if you are looking to understand more the music of Beethoven, how it's constructed, and in the context in which it was composed. And if you want to know more about the man too, because even if it's half the book that isn't about the music, there's still 450 pages that would be about Beethoven the man. So that's quite a bit of text too, so there's a lot to learn in there. So yeah, if you are interested in a biography of Beethoven that is focused on music, this one is for you. And it's very thorough, very, very thorough. There's not a lot that is not mentioned in there. Of course, I wouldn't know, but I don't think that there's a lot of room left for things that are not mentioned. So, yeah, that is it. That is going to be my review of Beethoven. Thank you everyone for watching. I will see you in the next video.